Hi, it's Yaacov Ben haRav Eliezer, now Forester Yaacov. A couple of years ago, I was at the archery range and I was preparing for some long distance shoot, and my landed baron came over to me and said, how's aiming work? What are you doing? And I thought about giving my usual flippant answer, which is that aiming is an advanced concept, certainly maybe an intermediate concept, and so we'll deal with it when you're ready. And realized, no, he's ready. He's been coming all season, and he's a landed baron. I can't be flippant to him, or I shouldn't be flippant to him. So I had to figure out what to say. What I ended up saying was, actually that adds up to more than I want to say right at the moment in the last couple of minutes of practice. So I'll teach a class, and one of the times I've got it down, you'll get a chance to attend it. I believe this is the 4th time I'm teaching the class. I don't know whether he's made it yet, but a lot of other people have enjoyed it. So that's the origin story of this class. So one of the things that makes aiming a hard topic to talk about is that there are a lot of related concepts. They're kind of intertwined, and everyone calls what they do aiming, and whatever they're talking about, aiming. So I will endeavor in this to tease out those different concepts and try and be more precise, but of course people can disagree with me about details and terminology. So I'm going to work from terms, define a term, think about what it means, go on to the next one, build complexity. So one of the reasons that aiming is a more advanced concept is that it relies on the basics being correct. And what I mean by the basics are all of the things that we have to do to get a shot down range, even on our first day. Someone had to coach us to do that first day, and we're still trying to get better at being more consistent and accurate about. So do we anchor to our face, to our chin, to the side of our face, to our shoulder? Do we anchor at all? Are we releasing smoothly, or are we plucking? Is our hand, are we gripping the bow, or are we loosely holding it? What angle are we holding it at? Is our elbow out of the way of the bowstring? Or all of these things are someone talked to us about our first day, hopefully, and we're all still struggling to get right. And in order to start talking about aiming, you need to be knowledgeable about those and doing them consistently and deliberately. By consistently, I mean the same every time, and by deliberately, I mean you're doing it that way because you thought about at least some of the options and picked that one, as opposed to just happening to do that because that's what came naturally. That requires a level of skill and experience. By reproducibly, I mean a lot of things, like shot to shot. I know a lot of people who, when they first start, do this kind of little dance. They go and they reach behind, they do 2 steps, and they grab an arrow, and then they put it on the bow, and then they turn around, and then they shoot, and then they go and get another arrow, and that is being inconsistent shot to shot. By the way, I'm a right-handed hand bow archer, so my examples are likely to be hand bow related. The concepts apply to crossbow as well, and if you want a crossbow focused version of this, you should go listen to Syrian and Robert's talk this morning, and you'll see that all the concepts I talk about apply to them, and especially to how the differences between their techniques. But I'm trying to give more precise terminology than just aiming for what each of them are doing. So shot-to-shot consistency, end-to-end consistency. That means sometimes when you walk up to the line, are you facing the target, and then other times you've got your shoulder to the target, and sometimes you've got your back to the target, and every time you're doing something different, and sometimes you've got a wide stance and a narrow stance. That is not being consistent end to end. And then of course there's practice to practice consistency. Are you showing up and working on the same sorts of things, making the same deliberate decisions each time you get to the range? So you've thought about your feet and your hips and pulling with your back muscles and your elbow and your grip on the bow and your release. You got that? You're pretty consistent about it. You're ready to think about aiming. Well, you're ready to think about the step before aiming. This is also a topic that has been talked about before. Adjusting, I'm going to hyper define here as the things we can do to how we shoot to affect where our arrows end up. So there was a great class earlier on techniques that are particularly good for adjusting groups when you're shooting very close to the ground, when you're shooting very close to you. Those are specialized adjusting techniques. They tell you how you can change your body mechanics to get your arrows to go in a different place. In order for adjusting to be useful, you need to have a group. A group is with the space on the target where your arrows end up. If they're all over the place, then no amount of adjusting is going to improve your score, because you can go from being all over the place off the target to being all over the place on the target, but there's not much more you can do. So another reason that aiming is an advanced topic is that you need to be building groups so that you can start adjusting. Of course, there's an expression that mastering a subject is being able to talk about it while also doing it. I know a lot of people who, if you ask if they breathe in or breathe out, will suddenly not be able to hit the broadside of a barn. Being able to say, oh yeah, I breathe out about halfway because that's what I decided to do, and then actually continue shooting is a very high level skill. And adjusting is going to be full of saying, oh, that felt natural, but in fact, to hit the target, you need to be here. The primary methods of adjusting for hand bowmen are, if you're shooting too far to the left, I'm going to stand up so that you can see me here, moving your entire body as a unit, twisting. That will adjust left and right. The other adjustment is up and down, where what you want to do is what's called the Teapot, in honor of the dance for I'm a Little Teapot. Come to a comfortable draw, and then bend at the hips or the waist, down or up. You want to do that. If you do what feels natural and just move at the shoulder, then you are going to have a hard time adjusting consistently, because at a natural draw, you might have the right length arrow, and then as your shoulder moves up, more and more of the arrow is sticking out the front. So you are messing with all kinds of mechanics at the same time. The Teapot has the advantage that it's just messing with the one variable, how high up, what angle of attack your arrow is going to be at. So that's adjusting. One small diversion to a topic called string walking, which is I believe one of the techniques talked about earlier for shooting directly at the ground. It is the process of either moving your anchor point to adjust what you hit, or moving where on the bowstring you knock. So I'm in more of a confined space here than I was expecting. Give me a second. Technical difficulties. No. I might knock here at my mark to shoot normally, but to get a closer target, I might adjust the arrow up so that I get a different perspective on what's going on. This is a technique that has its uses for adjustment, especially at close targets, especially close to the ground, but has limited availability, applicability. That was a diversion for spring walking. Okay, so now we get to the topic of the class. What do I mean by aiming? So I think aiming is the tools you have and the techniques you have for deciding how much to adjust based on where your groups ended up. There's my definition. And now I'm realizing that I'm much of the way through my material and I haven't asked for questions yet. So let me interrupt for a second do we have any questions?
There are no questions in the chat yet, just a conversation about your Teapot.
Yes. My Teapot.
Otherwise called Yarmulke.
Also called a yarmulke. It's just which language are you speaking? They mean the same thing. Was designed for me by by Master Peter the Red, who was my archery instructor. I got the East Kingdom rank of bowman, and my mother made me a yarmulke that said Yeoman Bowman. And he thought that was very funny and wondered if Mom could make me this one. And now everyone in the SCA knows me by the yarmulke, and I can't do anything in the SCA without wearing it, or people just like have no idea who I am. I'm like, we've shot an archery champions team together like a bunch of times in the past 10 years, and you don't know who I am if I'm not wearing this Teapot. But I don't mind, it's funny.
It's a thing.
It's a thing. All right, so aiming. Aiming is, as I'm defining it, the tools and techniques for deciding how much to adjust based on where your arrows ended up. So the first technique of aiming that we teach is called instinctive shooting, and it involves doing what feels right. This is very convenient. You can teach it on the first day, and it doesn't involve long conversations about details. So that's why we start with that one. Also, despite having lots of other material to go over, despite having lots of other content to go over, everything else boils down to the same thing. You got to do the right amount, whatever that is. It also has another major advantage. It can work in really weird situations. People who are good instinctive shooters can do things like shooting ambidextrously, like picking up equipment they've never seen before and shooting it decently. These are skills you get from just having an instinct about how this equipment will behave. It's also it's a little like how you aim when you're throwing a ball. Some people are better at it than others. I'm not particularly good at it. But I don't think even professionals have some sense about oh, if I move this way, it'll go higher or lower. You know how to throw the fastball, and you throw it to go where you want it to go, and it just kind of works. It has a major disadvantage, which is that if your instincts are telling you the wrong thing today, you're stuck. It doesn't matter how well you were shooting at practice yesterday, If you get up to the line today and it's tournament and your first arrow goes nowhere, and so you relax, and you're like, nope, just one arrow at a time, do the best I can with this shot, just do what feels right, and it goes nowhere, you're stuck. That's instinctive has just failed you. It has the advantage that it can integrate hundreds of decisions about every muscle in your body that might affect the shot and find a solution that works. And so can often do amazing things, but it has its limitations. Now we're going to talk about another thing that you hear about a lot, called point blank. It means basically a range at which you don't really have to think about it, you just kind of shoot. Now, in common parlance, that usually means a very close target, but you also hear it used for a particular range for you and your equipment, where, well, every definition of aiming agrees about what you do. You have a target, not entirely destroyed by the glare, less destroyed by the glare. You have a target. You have a right-handed recurve bow, because that's the kind of shooting I do. So you take the point of the arrow and you put it on the target, and you manage to do that without messing up all of the other basics we talked about earlier, and it goes in, and you shoot another one and it goes in, and after a while you get a group you're happy with centered on the target. Then that range can be referred to as your point blank with that equipment. What is really interesting about this range is that no matter how you think about aiming, everybody agrees about what should happen at that range. So it's a good place to start. Right. That's point blank. Everyone agrees what happens. Put the head of the arrow on the target, goes in. Now what happens if you're at a different range? Right? So you put the head of the arrow on the target, and it goes here. Can you see that at all? Probably not. It goes there at the X, right off into the woods somewhere. You don't want to make a nice group out there in the woods. You would like to move it. So one very natural thing that people call aiming, that I'm going to call point of aim, is to say, if putting the head of the arrow on the target, put the arrow up here, then I will put the head of the arrow somewhere down here. On that piece of grass, I will mark it X in my mind. I will then grab my arrow, grab my next shot, line up the head of the arrow with my X. Don't know whether you can see that at all, but head of the arrow on the X. And as long as I aim at that leaf every time, it'll go in. This is called point of aim, and it is very instinctive, and what a lot of people mean when they say aim lower. You will hear a lot of people say, oh, I find for clout, I need to aim at the top of that tree there. That means when they said aiming, they meant this technique. They're putting the head of the arrow on the target. The head of the arrow on the tree to go into the target. It has a lot of advantages. It is instinct. It is what you would guess aiming should be. It makes sense. It's easy to communicate about. It can be very precise. If you can see the tree, it can be very precise because you can pick an arbitrarily small thing to aim at. It's a good technique. Has a problem. A lot of people who tell you, oh, at Cloud, I aim for the tip of that tree, also tell you, oh, I've got to wait my turn for the slot at the range, because if I sit in the next slot over, I need to pick a different tree to aim at. It's not going to work for you the next time you're at a tournament, is it? So, or if you go to a different range, and the next target comes up, you need to pick a new leaf to aim at. So we would like to take that idea and make it a little more general. So we're going to tell the same story with another variation. Okay. So we're going to tell the same story again. We're just going to think about it slightly differently and give it a new name. We put the point of the arrow on the target. It goes into the woods. So far, our story is the same. We say, okay, it went up here, and we wanted it over here, so we need to move it that far. We didn't draw an X. We made an arrow, and we're going to move that arrow. That arrow now sits here, right? That arrow says that gap, the distance between where our arrow ended up and where we wanted it, is what we're going to keep track of. And we're going to move to a new range, and at the same distance, we can keep track of that gap. Oh, we need to aim at a point, in this case, 3 feet down and 1 foot to the left in order for it to go in. This is a lot more transferable because you walk up to the line, you remember what gap you use, and you find a leaf to aim at, and then you do the same thing as the first one. This is called gap shooting. It has a little more flexibility than the previous technique with a lot of the same benefits. Rupert this morning did another variation that is more common in the crossbow community than it is in Robert. Sorry, this morning demonstrated another technique that's more common in the crossbow community than the handbow community, which is if it doesn't go in the right place, you pick a different length arrow. Now, you find the arrow where for this distance, you put the head of the arrow on the target and it goes in. That's another very clever solution, but a different. It requires having calibrated arrows for every range you want to shoot at. And if you're shooting handbow, they can't get that short because you don't want to shoot the back of your hand. That's a class for another time. Sorry, my wife's making fun of me. All right, so that was gap shooting. Now we're on to limb markings, the way I was taught to shoot. And it's the same story, but with a massive twist. We put the head of the arrow on the target. This part of the story is getting kind of repetitive. We say it goes into the woods. We say, instead of putting a mark on here that keeps changing on us, we are going to put a mark on here. Actually, the bow in this question is clearly designed for this. It's a Wilson Brothers Black Widow from the 1960s. And you don't even need to actually put a physical mark on this bow because it's got these beautiful gradients here so that you can just pick a point. You say the head of the arrow went too high on the target, so I'm going to move up to compensate. Maybe if I put that point on the center of the target, my arrows will go in. And then you can line it up and shoot, and see where your groupings end up and adjust. This has a lot of advantages. Once you know what your sight picture looks like, you can transfer that to any range, any target. If your bow doesn't have pre-made markings like that one does, you can make your own. One traditional way of doing it is to put a piece of masking tape on the inside and mark off patterns that you like. Another way to do it is to put little pieces of tape at the different distances. By the way, that ends up in the crossbow world, that ends up with very much like Syrian's tower technique. Right? He has a vertical thing that he can put little pieces of tape on to mark where to line things up. If your bow is just plain, you can go ahead and just mark it with a pen. Gives you a very small thing to line up. In fact, this mark here, that mark there, is the one that started this whole conversation. I was calibrating that distance when I was asked what I was doing. So that is limb markings. I've seen it suggested that you mark your bow with differing colors for whether it's an even or odd number of yards. That makes it easy to remember and really clear when your sight picture is off, when you meant to draw to the 40-yard line but drew to the 30-yard line. You can use tape and just write the number on it. What? Right. The advantage of little slivers of tape or string is that as you hone them in, you can adjust them. You can move them up or down until you get it exactly right. Then you can draw on the bow. So that's the idea of limb markings. So the big thing I wanted to share here in conclusion is some stuff about terminology, right? Everybody says aiming, and they could mean almost anything from my handout when they say aiming. They could mean how to adjust to hit a target. They could even sometimes mean some basics about like, where do you anchor? They could mean that they're doing a point of aim technique, and they're talking about what in the real world do you put the head of the arrow on, or they could be talking about a gap technique where they're talking about how much difference do you have between the head of the arrow and the target, or they could be talking about some limb marking technique. What on the bow do you have to line up with the target to get to shoot the way you want to? I think I ran through that pretty fast, so I wouldn't be surprised if there are questions, and if there's stuff I need to review. Yeah, thank you very much.
There's no questions from the chat. So
Okay.
then we'll have questions that you want to ask out loud.
Anyone have a question they would like to ask out loud?
Or in the chat.
Or in the chat? Okay, then while you think about that, I am going to tell a story about basics and about how fundamental and important they are. I was many years ago at an archery practice where we had many archers, and there were getting to be about 10 of us who were intermediate or better. And every week we would hear Master Peter the Red give his introductory talk about, okay, here's how you stand, and here's how you use your back muscles and shape like a T, and anchor to the face, and pinky and thumb, and smooth the release instead of plucking, and keeping your elbow out of the way, and keeping your arm down range. And we were like, this is really good, but we know all of this. We could use like a separation of concerns, a class where class just focused at more advanced topics. And so Peter likes teaching beginners, so we had him go off to a different range to teach beginners, and we had Ugrain of Kelswood, Grandmaster Bowman, show up to give us a tour. She walked down the line. She said, "You need to work on plucking. You're releasing this way, and your elbow's inconsistent. Your bow jerks." That was mine. Your bow jerks every time you shoot. Still my problem. She wasn't wrong. And down the line, each one of us made a huge difference. Most of us gained 10 or 15 points in our royal round over the course of that one practice. It was a very big, very useful. She did not say a single thing to us as advanced archers that Peter had not said in every single practice we had attended before that. The basics are the basics. You got to get them right. You got to get them consistent. It can be helpful to have someone tell you this is the one you're struggling with, but it's all the same stuff. We're just getting better at it. What else is going on? Does someone have an interruption? Because I'm getting tired of listening to myself. Anything in the chat?
Someone in the chat said that you covered what I hoped you would about marking the bow.
All sounds good.
Good. All right. If you have other things or other thoughts, please let me know. The link is to my Google Doc of the notes. So every time I teach it, I usually add a couple of changes to that document, and it's a living document for every time I teach this class. Thank you so much. I hope this helps you. If not, helps you aim better, then helps you communicate with other people about what they want you to change in how you're shooting, or how you communicate with other people better about aiming. And yeah, and as I said earlier, deliberately deciding to change something will throw off literally everything else you've done. So don't be surprised if a little bit of aiming sets you back a long way. That's why it's an advanced topic. Anyway, thank you very much, and enjoy a coffee break.
Thank you for teaching this class again. If anyone remembers, we had him teach this. Yaacov taught this as our first Facebook Live class back, I don't know, April, was it? When we first got shut down on our events.
It was something like that, yeah. And I hope to, if there's a nice day one of these days, get out on a range and teach it again to a camera where I can do multiple takes and edit it into a clear and coherent piece.
Right.
Instead of all just repeating myself.
Yep. So thank you for teaching this again.
This is a good, really good set of information for somebody who is teaching others as well. Thank you for that.
Yes.
And yeah, that was Patrick.
It's also hard because when an intermediate archer comes to you and says, okay, I know aiming is an advanced topic, but I think I'm ready for it. They already have in their head something they mean by aiming, and they're just calling it aiming, and you have no idea how they're thinking about it or what's going on. And so even giving a name to the ways people normally think about it can help you categorize it in your head to think about, based on what they're talking about, how are they thinking about it? How can I help them? How can I help them understand other techniques?